What do you think?
This idea that like marriage is the only way that you can have a sacred, positive sexual experience is a fallacy.
That was Mattie Jo Cowsert discussing purity culture with me here on the podcast. All the social data I've seen shows that everything is better for people with the less sexual partners that you have. Less likely to be divorced, less likely to be cheating for people who aren't having premarital sex. Mattie Jo is an actor, shameless oversharer, and author of her new book, God, Sex, and Rich People, a recovering evangelical testimony. Striving for the ideal, I think, is beautiful. Our ideas of ideal is different, right?
50%, over 50% end in divorce. So this public proclamation doesn't mean garbage.
Is purity culture toxic? Are there benefits to waiting until marriage for sex?
Yeah, maybe they're not gonna cheat because
It kind of sounds like you might be, that cheating is sometimes okay.
yeah, what are my thoughts on cheating?
I was raised in a way that taught me it is better to wait until marriage to have sex for all these different reasons.
Kids who get abstinence-only education are having sex at the exact same rates as kids who get holistic and comprehensive sex ed.
Should sex be a sacred experience?
Sometimes sex can just be fun. It doesn't have to be so serious. However, it should always be respectful.
But if it's not sacred, it's just fun, then why does it hurt so bad if someone uses you for it? Does the amount of people have anything to do with it for you? Like if someone sleeps with 150 people, there are no downsides. Our sex in the beginning was nowhere near what it is now. But you know what it was? It was super secure. It was super safe. It was with my best friend.
Do you think you would feel the same about waiting until you were married if you hadn't met someone until like your late 30s?
So that's a really good question. We get into all that and more today. Welcome to the Ellen Fisher Podcast.
That's what we harbor in American culture because we're so shameful about sex.
Because I kind of feel like I'm in the minority here. Before we get into the episode, both Maddie and I want to affirm each and every one of you for your worth and value just as you are, no matter your circumstances, no matter what you've been through or have been forced to go through. If you have been forced into sex or anything with your body against your will, we are so very sorry and you did not deserve that. You deserved and will always deserve protection and respect and dignity. To everyone listening, nothing can take away your worth as a uniquely and divinely made human being, and you are loved. If you are struggling and need healing, please seek support. We hope you enjoy our nuanced conversation. After the recording, we both sent each other voice messages back and forth for all the things we missed and didn't get a chance to talk about together. We know that we are just two human beings sharing our lived experience and perspectives, which does not cover all stories and views. Some people are happy for every sexual partnership they've experienced. Some people have felt used and scarred from previous sexual experiences in their past. Some people are thankful for the unwavering covenant of marriage to be there for the other even when they aren't, while others are thankful for divorce to get out of unnecessary situations. So feel free to share your story in the comments, and thank you for being here. Mattie Jo, thank you so much for being here. I am super excited for this conversation. This is a topic that I don't see happening very much online or just even in person very much. And I know you have a lot to say about it. And I have some things to say too. So let's have a conversation. Okay. So my first question is, what is your story? Like, what led you to this place of caring about this topic of sexuality and freedom and religion and all this stuff?
Yeah, so sort of my elevator pitch is I was a pastor's daughter and proud purity ring wearer, and I practiced a faith that was very important and very personal to me. Until I moved to New York City to become an actor in my early 20s and kind of instead of becoming a wife like I was supposed to, and my entire identity imploded thanks to Tinder and my Jewish roommate. So all of my secular world experiences were culminating to force me to question my faith, my sexuality, all while living with and working for the 1%. So it was culture shock from every angle. And that's what led me to write about it on the internet in my blog, God, Sex, and Rich People. So that's sort of the elevator pitch, right? The more nuanced and detailed, which I'll still try to be brief, was that, you know, like I said, I was a pastor's kid, proud purity ring wearer. Like my faith really was my entire identity. And I really thought that like when I would move to New York, I would just sort of take all of that with me and be exactly the same person, but just in a different setting. But what I realized is just by living in New York and meeting all different kinds of people and having all different kinds of experiences, that much of what I was presented as absolute truth in my evangelical upbringing, that this is the only way to truly be in alignment with the word of God. And this is the only way to truly be a woman of God and to be in God's favor and to be blessed and all of these things. These were absolute truths. They fall apart really quickly when you take them out of a very specific subculture. And so as I was, my life experiences were super conflicting with what I had been told, then it led me to doing scriptural research, history research, and starting to study the Bible and study the history of Christianity and even before Christianity, right? In like a pretty didactic way. And I got like very studious about it. Like I was literally reading textbooks, right? And what I found is that, yeah, what I had learned, the version of Christianity that I had gotten from my evangelical upbringing was incredibly reductive and incredibly bastardized. And it is not at all true. It is not absolute truth. And in fact, most of it is all about social control. It is all about power and control. It's not, and it's all based in fear. It is not based in love. And I, as a woman who very much did not identify with like the quiet and gentle spirit and all of the things I was supposed to be as a woman of God, get married young, you know, don't be promiscuous or whatever else they say. I always say, like, I was definitely always like the horny girl in youth group. You know, I was boy crazy, which is really just youth group talk for like slut shaming girls for having a very normal experience of adolescence, which is liking boys, right? Like I was being shamed for doing the thing that they wanted me to do, which is like be straight. And so yeah, I mean, I just never felt like I fit into that, but I didn't have a space or an environment to really explore it further. But then once I got to New York, and I did, and my anonymity was like the biggest gift because I just got to truly explore who I was. I realized, wow, I have never resonated with these labels or these identities that were like put on me, but I felt like I had to, because if I didn't, I'd go to hell, right? So that's the sort of, and I get really passionate specifically about the sexuality part of it, because again, I think it just goes back to like social control and keeping women stressed and ashamed of something that is supernatural, which is sexuality and their sexual expression.
Cool. So this conversation is so interesting and layered because we could go into an entire podcast episode just about the religion aspect of what you just mentioned. Or we could focus on like the topic of, should we wait until marriage to have sex or sleep with whoever? Like, is there an ideal way? And I want to hit both for sure. Let's get into this religion thing a little bit.
Okay.
If you're good with it. I think that is such an interesting conversation because I also was raised in a Christian home and I resonate a lot with what you're saying about, you know, the control that you can feel, or the feeling of like, there is this one way and you really are only taught one way, and you're not taught, at least my experience. I don't think this is true for everyone. It just depends on who, like how you were raised, right?
And what your experience of Christianity was, because there are lots of versions, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And something that I love my parents. I think they were such good parents, and I'm so grateful for the way that I was raised. At the same time, I can also see, looking back, that there were certain things where, you know, because as a child, you're really impressionable and you believe whatever you're told and whatever you're surrounded by. I grew up in youth group as well. I grew up with all that same kind of social circles, but I didn't necessarily take away from it the same thing that you did, because we're all unique and we're all going to like respond to it differently. So for me, I waited until marriage to have sex, and I'm really glad that I did. And at the time, when that was a choice that I was making in high school, I think a lot of it was surrounded by the culture I was in and the expectations that were set and just the recommendations and things. And so there is a layer there, but I also found my own choice that I truly wanted to do this, like for reasons outside of and within the Bible too, because I was raised as a Christian, but also outside of the Bible, that it made sense for me in every other factor of my life too, to wait until I was married. Like I knew after conversations I had had and just like contemplating, the older I got, you know, like this is something I really wanted for myself, because I knew that if I were having sex with somebody before I got married and we were in a committed lifelong partnership, I knew that that would greatly affect me emotionally. And I wanted to some people don't like that word save that, but like, I don't know how else to explain it, but I wanted to keep that as a sacred experience for my life partner, for like someone that I would spend my life with. And so I'm really glad that I did that. But this is, before we get in more into that, about religion, I do think that there are a lot of people that can experience what you experienced, where you grow up and you're like, wait a second, this really affected my sexuality in a negative way, not just women, but even men.
Oh, definitely men.
Yeah. Sometimes it can affect men, probably more especially in a performance level when they're older, that they were taught their whole lives to be ashamed of their sexual desires.
Or they're framed as predators.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't know. I never thought about that one too.
Yeah. Like the second they have a boner, they're just like, oh, I'm uncontrollable.
Yeah.
Like,
and like, oh, you have a that and hide it. Yeah. And I think it really depends on how it's framed, right? Like on how, because I think there's not a one size fits all on how people were raised with Christianity, right? Like I never felt the feeling that like my sexuality was bad. But some people, like, it sounds like, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you were kind of raised that it was like this dirty, bad thing, or at least I know people that felt that in Christianity. Would you say that that's fair?
Well, because Christianity is masterfully manipulative, it was never explicitly said. None of the things that I internalized were explicit.
Okay.
It was all subtle, repeated messaging around the issue, right?
Okay.
So they would paint it as like, no, sex is beautiful and sacred, and but only within marriage.
Right.
And anytime it's outside of marriage, it's wrong, it's sinful, it's bad, it's all of these things. So like, you're just supposed to never think of sex as anything except like great and sacred and amazing, but only within a marriage.
Yeah.
So then like all the stuff around it, like they're never saying it's bad, it's dirty, right? But they're saying it's sin. It's sin, and you're ruining your future marriage.
Right.
You're ruining your future relationship. You're ruining your potential to be whole and good.
As someone who's mindful about the kinds of products I bring into my home and tries to avoid endocrine disrupting chemicals found in most fragrance products on the market, I'm excited to be able to tell you about Sayu. Sayu handcrafts essential oil blends designed for those who love yummy scents on their body and in their home, but care deeply about what exactly they're breathing in. Their curated line of blends are made to be used aromatherapeutically and as non-toxic perfume cologne alternatives, and can be used direct onto the skin or in a diffuser. Sayu uses 100% organically farmed or regeneratively wild-crafted plants in their blends. Their sourcing reflects a deep reverence for the earth and indigenous botanical wisdom, working directly with farmers and foragers to harvest the plants that are then distilled without any chemical solvents, resulting in a line of extraordinarily pure and potent oil blends with an unwavering focus on quality. Every step of the process reflects their dedication to put people and the planet before profits at every crossroads, including supporting fair wage practices and conservation initiatives. Having my Sayu oils with me throughout my day makes it easy to take even just 30 seconds amidst the chaos to pause, take a deep inhale, and reset my thought patterns. I got their Discovery set, which includes a full-size bottle of each of their bestsellers and is the perfect place to begin your immersive Sayu journey. I've been personally loving using each oil in the set for a different purpose throughout the day. For example, I love using Helios in the morning, giving me an invigorating burst of energy before work or a workout. Elysium to wind down in the evenings. Eros has become my go-to sensual perfume, and I love Valhalla on Andrew as a woodsy grounding cologne that is entirely chemical-free. You'll already save more than $50 with the Discovery set, but with my code Ellen, you'll get an additional 15% off your first purchase with Sayu for a limited time only.
They don't have to say dirty,
yeah,
right? But they're saying
that's the way
these other things,
yeah, and
right?
so I think that's the beauty of like the unique human experience, that we're all going to receive it in a different way, because I guess that is pretty accurate on how I was described it as well. But I don't know if I internalized it in a bad way. Like for me, it was like I did see the benefits of why it was beautiful to wait until marriage. And then I just went with that because I was like, my husband and I, we started dating when we were 15 and 16. So we dated for 6 years, and that was, he was raised in a Christian home, but it was definitely more my conscious choice to wait until we were married, and he respected that. And in the end, he was glad that we did. And so we dated for 6 years, but it was very hard. You're right in that, like, your prime of your horniness, if you will.
Your hormones are through the roof when you're a teen.
But like, we had boundaries in regards to how far that we decided, and I wanted to be willing to go. And I'm so glad that we waited. So for me, it wasn't this I didn't experience like this like shame and bad experiences, but I can imagine for someone who maybe they heard all that and then they chose for whatever reason chose not to, then they do feel that shame because they were taught, if you don't do it exactly this way, you're going to feel this X, Y, and Z. And I'm sure that is influencing a ton of people. So fully with you there. So I feel like it's kind of a balance of trying to understand, like if we're talking in the framework of raising children with the value of waiting until marriage, which obviously you're not going to advocate for, it sounds like. But I think there's a way that could be healthy and a way that could be very toxic and not healthy. What do you think about that?
So I think your situation with your husband, actually, like what you guys chose makes sense because you were teenagers when you met. It's so different to make that decision. Let's say my boyfriend was 35 when we met. I was 32. If we date 6 years, it's very different. Your brain is different. Your body is different. Your maturation as a person is just totally different. Waiting till marriage when you're 32 and 35 is a totally different story than 16 and 15, right?
Although I would argue you probably wouldn't, if your intentions were to date for marriage, you probably wouldn't wait that long. But because we were so young, that's why we waited that long.
Yeah.
So that's my
caveat. So like the whole date to marry thing is something I talk about a lot in my writing, is like dating to marry versus dating for data, and how dating for data can still be dating to marry. It's just not putting so much of a pressure on every single person that you date has to be the person that you end up with, because that creates a ton of anxiety. Like this is a little bit of a tangent, but like a lot of women that I have spoken to coming out of purity culture, it's like because it was so drilled into our heads that like you have to date to marry, like they couldn't even go on a first date with a guy without like extreme anxiety if they didn't know for sure that he was going to be the person that they would end up with. And it's like, well, but how do you know if you...
Wait, why would they feel that way?
Because, well, there's all of this culture around courtship and around how you should just pray and God will tell you who you're supposed to marry. So it came from a culture of like, God told me we were going to get married, or this pressure of like, if you date someone, it needs to end in marriage, because again, going back to purity culture, you're taught that as a woman, your value is defiled the more boyfriends you have, right? The message around like guard your heart was basically like have as few boyfriends as possible, because every time you fall in love with someone who isn't your husband, you're giving more of yourself away. Never mind if you have sex with people, then you're definitely like, degrading your value. So there is this pressure to marry the first person you ever dated. And as a result, so that could mean that like you still date them for a long time, but maybe marry someone that you really shouldn't have married, because you felt like you have to marry the first person you ever date, because date to marry, right? And many people coming out of purity culture have since divorced because they married the wrong person. That wasn't the person that they should have ended up with. They made a decision before their brains were fully developed, like they became entirely different people, all of these things. And then I think there's also the message of like saving yourself until marriage. The idea is that you're saving it for someone that you will be with forever. But that's not the reality. 50% of marriages end in divorces, right? And that's not even including infidelity, right? Like marriage isn't this thing that guarantees you'll be with this person forever. You might come into a contract with one person and then they become a totally different person, or they're abusive, or all of the reasons people leave marriages, or people stay in marriages because they need to like save themselves until marriage, and then they get in it and it's really unhealthy sexually, right? There are so many things. So I think like this idea that like marriage is the only sanctified way that you can have like a sacred, positive sexual experience is a fallacy. It's not true. Obviously, it worked out. My parents are high school sweethearts, and they are still super happy. I talk a lot about them in my book. But I would say they're the exception, not the rule. There's a lot of, that went into that, and like how my dad and my mom have worked out and whatever, but they were pregnant before they were married. So they didn't save themselves necessarily. There's a whole story there as well. But anyway, kind of tangential. I can't even remember exactly what the question was.
But I have responses to what you're going to say.
I think, I don't think it. Sorry, what was your original question? I totally got off on that
I
tangent.
don't remember.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry.
That's okay. So I personally didn't experience being told that, you know, the first person you're gonna date, that's who you should marry.
Okay.
The more people you date, that like tarnishes your value or something. That was not something I was taught. And so again, this goes back to like unique experiences and the way somebody was raised. I definitely would never advocate for that. That like you shouldn't date people to figure out who is your match. Like I definitely, like, to me, that's super important. And it just so worked out that my husband and I, as we date, we're completely different people when we were 15 and 16. Oh my gosh. We look back and we're like, oh my gosh. But
you grew together.
We grew together rather than apart.
Yeah.
And we ended up learning and being inspired from each other's best parts of ourselves. And that's how we became better and more mature and wonderful from learning from each other. That's just what happened to us. But
I remember what I was going to say. Can I say it really quick? Sorry, it goes back. You reminded me what your original question was. The saving yourself until marriage, like when you're a teenager, also, I was going to say, like, emotionally and mentally, I think it does make sense to like delay that decision, and we can get more into that later.
Yeah.
But like, if you're, again, like going back to age, like, I don't know that it necessarily makes sense just like where you like, yes, it makes sense when you're younger, I think, to wait longer.
Yeah.
And I don't know that translates in terms of like age across the spectrum.
Yeah.
So.
It definitely, no, it's fine. It definitely is different dating when you're 16 versus dating when you're 35. Like that's very different experiences for sure. And I don't know what that's like to like date someone that, you know, trying to like not have sex till I'm married and at that age, like, that's very different. I still think that there are massive benefits to having sex with one person for life in ideal situations when you're with someone that is a wonderful human, right? Like we're not talking about the exceptions, at least I'm not, of abuse and, you know, super unhealthy situations. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, you know, like the ideal. And to me, I think striving for the ideal, I think, is beautiful. And we are different. Our ideas of ideal is different, right? Like for me, when you're talking about, marriage and who you sleep with, who you should sleep with before, all the social data I've seen shows that that everything is better for people, the less sexual partners that you have, that there's less likely to be divorce when you sleep with one person for life. There's less likely to be cheating for people who aren't having premarital sex, different things like that, you know? So for me, I think the benefits span from not just a religious standpoint, but just from a standpoint for what makes good sense for strong families and for good relationships. And that's what I'm saying. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think that data, you know, I'd have to look into it more, but I think that those data points are maybe too simplified because, like, yes, perhaps there's less divorce, or what was the other one there?
Less cheating.
Less cheating. Perhaps that is true. But from what I know of like purity culture and the conditioning around like only having one partner, a lot of it is fear mongering. So like, yeah, maybe they're not going to cheat because of the beliefs that they have of the repercussions of that decision would like take them out as a human, or like the world that they're in, like it would tarnish their reputation so much that like the threat of all of that, of losing their community and the excommunication from the church, if you will, right? That would keep them in line, essentially. And less divorce. Yeah, because, you know, you don't have as much experience to know, I don't want to say what's out there in a way that you're always pining for more, but like, yeah, you don't know you're in an unsatisfactory relationship until you have a really good one. Like, you know, like I didn't know what I was missing out on in terms of like a relationship of like mutual respect and healthy communication and everything until I was in one. Or, you know, I saw it modeled for me. So I always had that in my parents. So I always had that to compare it to. But I'm fortunate in that. Many people do not grow up in homes where their parents prioritize their relationship, you know, or teach you how to have good communication skills as a partnership. Like I learned that from my parents. So I always had that to compare my current partners to. But at the same time, it was like, until I was really in it, I didn't know how not great all those other relationships were. So yes, of course, if like the only experience of sex or relationship that you've had is the one that you're married, like, yeah, of course, I think it makes sense that many would not leave that because they don't really know what they're missing.
But that's assuming that they are missing
otherwise.
something.
Right. And that's true. But it's assuming, and it could be that they're absolutely not. Like, it sounds like you and your husband have an amazing situation. But in my experience, of all the people that I've seen who have like saved themselves or only dated one person, and it like,
well, just to be clear, I'm not advocating for only dating one person. That's just what happened with us.
Yeah. Okay.
But yes, yeah. Like, I think you should date to find your right partner, the person that would be that you want to marry for life and commit to. And you should date around to figure out who that person is, not just like point to someone and pick them and hope that it's the best. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think, so it could be, I would be interested to see a study of like asking them, why are they still together? Has your marriage been happy of the years that, because really the only gauge that we have in our culture of a quality relationship is how long have you been together? We don't pry further and say how many of those years have been happy.
Absolutely.
Like, totally. So I would be interested to see that.
Then what are your thoughts that it kind of sounds like you might be that cheating is sometimes okay? Is that how you're advocating? Based on the way you described it, it kind of sounds like, oh, cheating is okay in some circumstances, or like you're fine with it, or what are your thoughts on cheating?
Yeah, what are my thoughts on cheating? It's so funny. On the way here, I was talking with my friend, and I was like, do you think flirting is cheating? So we were like having, do I think sometimes cheating is okay? Yeah. I think if you're in an abusive relationship and you feel like you have to maintain a secret life to like maintain your safety. Like, there are so many.
Okay, so you're talking about like a very extreme circumstance where someone is being abused so much so to where they cannot leave.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, or like their financial livelihood is attached to.
I imagine people that are in that much danger don't have the opportunity to cheat.
Probably.
That would be
right. Like, I don't know. I can't like sit here and think of like every single circumstance.
Yeah.
Do I think that open, honest communication is always the right choice? Yeah, but I can't speak for like everybody's situation. I certainly think that cheating is a symptom of what's really going on in your relationship. And if it gets to that point, there's a lot of work that hasn't, or lots of bridges and conversations that haven't been crossed.
Yeah. And, for anyone who's listened to the debate I did on monogamy versus polyamory, my husband and I were very clear that we aren't advocating for just regular old monogamy. Like, most people are going through like not great monogamy.
Yeah.
Like, just toxic, unhealthy, not going together. We are advocating for ideal monogamy, the best, like reaching for your best, working on yourself, the best, to be the best person for your partner and for yourself. And that includes both people being willing to grow and evolve and be here for each other and service each other and be loving to one another. So that's what I'm advocating for.
Yeah. And I would say, like, when it comes to, relationship psychology, I definitely lean more Gottman Institute than, what's the other woman? Esther Perel. Right? Like, I don't know if you're familiar with her work versus like, but Gottman Institute would be more like lean into one another. Esther Perel would be like explore and not ask your partner to meet all of your needs. So she has a lot of work about non-monogamy, basically. So do I think that cheating is ever okay? Maybe in extreme circumstances where like someone feels like there's no way out, but in this sort of like very secret way. But otherwise, I would say the best choice is to go to the symptom and the root of like what's really going on that is putting you in a situation where you feel like you have to cheat or you want to cheat.
A symptom of, like you said, an issue that needs to be worked on, not necessarily abandoned.
Yeah.
Like, and like, oh, you're just not my right person because I feel tempted to cheat. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, totally.
And I also, going back a little bit to like the indoctrination stuff that you were talking about, I think it, at least for me, is helpful to not necessarily label it as fear mongering and more label it as something of like maybe initially good intentions, but not promoted in the right way. That like, I, at least from my perspective, I think that people in faith circles know that or believe that monogamy and like true monogamy, where you sleep with one person in a committed relationship for life, that is going to produce you the best results for family and lifelong love. And like I was saying, all the social data, I didn't mention all of it, but if you look at it, I can send you some studies later or whatever that I have written here that are basically showing that you're more likely to have better sex and that your relationship is better, your long-term happiness, like better for children and families. Like it's all just promotes a more likelihood of a lifelong happiness in relationship. And that doesn't mean that everybody who's monogamous is like that. Again, I think most monogamy is not healthy. I think most people in America, in the world, are like not, I mean, we can't speak to other countries, but at least in America, are not being intentional with how you live your life in all different factors, right? Like in health, like look at everybody in their health, right? Most people are not intentionally taking care of themselves physically, let alone emotionally. And how is that playing out and affecting your relationship? Like it's going to affect it negatively. So I'm talking about the ideal, and I think you're talking about what you think might be the ideal as well, and we're just maybe disagreeing on what the ideal is.
Yeah, so I would say my ideal is very similar to yours, like absolutely. I guess it's like how we get there, which is always the opposing views, right? It's like maybe two people are mostly on the same page, but it's like, how do you get there? I think it's the difference in like political views, right? Maybe going for the same goal, how we get there. For me, my ideal in terms of the relationship that you described is similar. I just think that the best way for me, I can't say for everyone, because everybody's different, but in terms of like what I've seen mostly in my life, is that the way to know yourself the best is to allow yourself on like your authentic journey. And to know and to have experiences that you collect data with along the way. And for some people, it might be that you get married very young and you have a lot of that collection of data within your marriage. And, but that is also assuming that everyone wants to be married young and that marriage is on everyone's docket by a certain age. And like for me, I wanted to be an actor. And I don't know if you're familiar with the life of a young actor in New York City, but it's anything but stable. And I talk about that in my book. Like I thought like I would just move to New York and then I'd meet someone and we'd get married by the time I was like 23, but like that did not align with what I was pursuing at that point in my life, which is like as a musical theater performer, there were times when I would be like on a contract for 6 months outside of the city, living somewhere else, uprooting, my day-to-day even, it was like I would be up at like 4 a.m. to go to an audition. And then from that audition, I would go to the gym. And then from the gym, I'd go babysit for 4 hours. And then I'd go to another family for another 5 hours, or then I'd go to my bar shift, like sometimes all in one day. Like there were days where I would literally do audition, 2 different babysitting shifts, then go to, my bartending shift. Like it was not the time for me to be having babies and being married. And so not everybody's path in their life can involve a relationship. Like my college boyfriend and I really thought that we would get married because that's just what you do. You marry your college sweetheart, like where I'm from. But he was going to med school and he was going to go to med school in Missouri. And I wanted to be an actor and I would have had to give up my dreams to be with him. And not only that, it was not the time for him to be settling down in lifelong matrimony while going through med school. Like only one super stressful thing in life at a time, and he expressed that to me. He was like, I don't want to be married during med school. And so I think just with the way that we are now, especially societally, where like women have mostly the same opportunities as men, marriage is not always the goal by a certain age, and it can't fit into everybody's life on the same timeline. And so your sexual expression and your sexual experiences shouldn't be like on the same timeline as marriage. Because at a certain point, and I couldn't find, not that I couldn't find, I don't know where this is, but I would love to see studies on like delaying sexual activity to a certain age and like how healthy that really is, because I will tell you, men and women that I see delaying sexual activity way long in their lives because they didn't get married young and like whatever, it becomes so perverted. And I don't mean that in like they're like molesters or something. I mean like it's just perverted and that it's not like healthy. and the way that they behave around sex is still so infantile and juvenile. Infantile is not the right word, juvenile. Like you see like men in their mid-30s who still behave like boys in middle school because they've had no proper like progression and maturation of like sexual expression. And I see it in women too. And so I think like assuming that everyone can be on a timeline of marriage by an age appropriate time to begin having sex both emotionally and mentally is like, given our society, that's like not realistic. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that I think that you should be married on a certain timeline, but I do think that it's a good point to bring up that like not having sex until you're 35 and 40, if your timeline and your goals and your desires are not to get married younger, then it's going to look a lot different.
Or like it's just like conflicting priorities, right? Like it worked out for you because you met who you wanted to marry in high school. Anyone who stayed single into their 20s can tell you finding someone you're compatible with is a lot of freaking work.
Yeah, I have some friends who are still single and I'm like, gosh, I am so glad I'm not in your shoes. To be honest, I'm like, that sounds so stressful.
It is so stressful.
Yeah, and especially with like the world that we're in now where people are not like just walking up to you at a diner saying, you're beautiful, can I take you out for dinner? Like that's not what's happening now. It's very like,
and if it did, you'd be like, oh.
Yeah. Which I'm like, can we bring that back? That's what, if I was single in that space, that's what I would be advocating for and hoping for. Like, I think the scrolling on the apps thing is just like damaging to our society. It feels like a Black Mirror episode, to be honest. Not that you can't meet someone you love on a dating app.
I met my partner on an app.
Yeah, I definitely know people who have wonderful relationships. So that's not to dog it, but to just like make that the norm and to how difficult it is to just meet someone in real life that you have a connection with, that has a spark. Like, that's really sad to me that that's not how it is anymore.
Well, and because people want different things. So like if you look at, Modern Love, that book that Aziz Ansari wrote before he got canceled, he did like a deep dive into like, why is it so hard to find love now, right? And did like a sociological study of this. And one of the factors is that we want different things out of a relationship than previous generations wanted. For most women, in previous generations, let's say like our grandmothers, they just wanted out of the house. They couldn't move out until they were married, and for like my mom's generation, like many of my aunts will tell you, it's just what you did. You just got married to the guy you dated in high school or, in college, and you had kids. It's what you did. Our society had better support for it. It was easier to own a house. It was easier to have childcare. College didn't cost as much. Like my mom had 4 kids in her 20s, right? Like she was done having kids by the time she was 28 and on a 1-income household.
Yeah, it's way different.
It's so different now. So like society just doesn't set us up for the same things. And also like women, I would love to send you, or I would love to be able to quote these for you. I can send these studies to you. But women are far surpassing men right now in terms of their earning, their emotional intelligence, just like overall women are surpassing men. So like now we've got this unequal thing where like women want different things. We don't need men to just be our providers.
Trust me, we can all use a little support when it comes to staying on top of our nutrition with busy lives, children, and the sometimes seemingly never-ending to-do list. Along with eating a whole foods plant-based diet to help me feel my best, I am obsessed with Anima Mundi's beautiful selection of products. Founded by herbalist Adriana Ayales, Anima Mundi is an apothecary which uses over 200 different sustainably grown herbs from around the world to create intentional products that contain zero fillers, binders, or flow agents. Made in the US with certified organic, wild-crafted, and sustainably harvested plants and herbs in a vegan and gluten-free kitchen, they also use eco-friendly packaging in recyclable glass or biodegradable bags. I love the spirulina, which is an organic, protein-rich mineralizer that tastes delicious in banana mango smoothies, and the butterfly pea powder, which you can add to your favorite tea, lemonade, favorite meal, or even your bath or face mask for health promoting and healing properties. I got a discount code for you guys. Enter the code LMFisher20 for 20% off. Click the link in my show notes below. So I would push back a little bit on this. Like I just interviewed this wonderful woman, Suzanne Benker, on my podcast called 30-something Women Are Having an Identity Crisis. And just to share a little bit about my story, I didn't really grow up with the same, I feel like, feelings about the way you, like we've established at the beginning. the way that I was raised in high school and stuff, I just never really felt permission to just want to be a mom. It feels like the pendulum is always swinging, right? In every topic of society, it's like, oh wait, we don't want that. Let's go far to the other end, too far is my thoughts, to where we go so far with that we deny biological realities that it's very normal for women to want to get married and have babies, and that is a big purpose. Like for me, having my children is the most important thing I've ever done in my life. Nothing surpasses it, not even close. Like my children are just, I'm so thankful that I get to be a mom. And so when I was in high school, I knew that's all I really wanted was to get married and have kids. And I didn't feel permission for that. Like I was always told like, oh, you got to go to college, go make something of yourself first, go get a big career, and then you can settle down.
Interesting.
But the thing is,
where did you grow up?
In Orange County.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, all right.
California.
That would check out a little bit more.
Right? Maybe. Right. And so it was like, go make something of yourself. And I think that is like the big thing that women are taught today, that like, go make something of yourself. Kind of like you said, women are outpacing men. It's true. Women are outpacing men in like the amount of women that are going to medical school now compared to men. Like it's massively different than what it was 20 years ago. And I think what happens is women get in this predicament where they don't expect to feel the feelings they do once they have children, in that you're thinking, I have this great career. And this is why Suzanne Benker does what she does, where she's like helping women feel permission to just, it's okay to want to just be a mom. Whereas we've been taught like, it's like, you got to have your career, you got to do both. And that's like way too exhausting, so it's very normal and common for women. I've talked to a lot of women about it. And then like I was talking to Suzanne about it, about how you just don't expect to find yourself in the situation that men don't have those same feelings because we're biologically different. We have different core desires. As a general term, this is not every single person, but generally, and that's normal and that's okay. And so like a man who, he has kids, it's his normal provider masculine role that wants to go provide. And for women, they might have this providing role too, where they have a job, but they're like, my heart is with my family and I just want to be with my kids. And so this is a thing that our society is now delaying and waiting to have kids till later. And now we're seeing more infertility issues because women are choosing to delay something that has been historically like the most meaningful thing that we've ever done, is raise children. And people might argue that it isn't, but like, I think generally that it is that's my stance on it, that it is like the most beautiful and nurturing thing that you'll ever do, the most rewarding thing that a woman can do. And obviously men can be nurturing, men have their roles, and fatherhood are so important. But I think men and women roles are different as a general, and that's okay. But listen, I'm the one who I do work, right? Like my husband is at home with me and he's homeschooling the kids and he helps me with work and stuff. So it's not like I'm saying women can't work and Like it's just the way that my life ended up happening. But I just look back and I remember that's all I wanted. I just wanted, like, it was like, oh, what like major are you going to do? I was like, I don't know. I just want to get married and have kids. Do I have to do this? That's how I felt. So yeah,
I'll push back a little bit only on like where the onus lies in that, because I think a lot of pressure gets put on women to like course correct on this. Like, and I actually just think it's like the society and system that we're in. And then it's like, we feel the blame, but let me back up a little bit.
Yeah.
To your point, there is absolutely, this is like my biggest passion about like the misunderstanding of like the feminist movement, is there is absolutely nothing wrong with even just to say just, right? Like that's qualifying it. I want to stay home.
Sound like it's not as important.
Right. Yeah. I want to be a mom. I want to stay home with my kids. Boom. Done. No more explanation.
Yeah.
Right. I want a big job in journalism. I want to be an actor.
Yeah.
I want to be the CFO of a Fortune 500 company, right?
Yeah.
I want, and guess what? I get to freaking do it. That's the point of the feminist movement, is the right to choose.
And I'm with you there.
Yeah.
I think I'm so with you there. 100%. If you don't want to be a mom, you don't want to be a mom. I'm not here to be like, you should be a mom if you don't want to be a mom. My point being is that I think women go into this a little further and then they like not knowing that they get in this situation where when they do decide to have kids, because then they realize later, wait, I do want to have kids.
Yeah.
And then they have kids and they realize they're kind of stuck.
Yeah.
Well, because high-powered position, but their heart is with their family, not because society is telling them to be at home, but because their heart wants to do it.
Right.
It's gut wrenching where you're like, I'm at work, but my kid is in daycare and I just want to be with my kid. Like that is a very common thing that happens. Not saying it happens to everyone, but I think it is the majority for women who have to work, who have their little kids.
I think so. There's there's the like right to choose, but then I think also, and I'm not like fully educated on all the different wings of feminism and everything. So I'll just preface with that. But I think what maybe in effort to create equality, what we did is we just like fought masculinity with masculinity.
Yeah.
And instead of embracing femininity and like the power of femininity and what that brings to balance out masculinity, we just, so then it was like, okay, in order to like be equal, we just have to become like men.
Exactly.
And so women aren't actually even stepping into their roles in these different jobs and bringing like the feminine power, like what, the women. Listen, and Lynn, I'll have to like get you all of the stats, but like companies that are run by women do better for so many reasons because they bring more interpersonal, right? Like they can listen better. We have better like overall communication skills. Like, so women should actually be bringing a lot more of like the femininity into the workplace and the power of the feminine. And if as a culture, we upheld that balance, women would probably have a lot more support when it comes to like their families and being at home. Look, I have a friend who lives in the UK. She married an English guy. She has a career in event planning. She's about to get a whole year of paid leave.
It's amazing.
Right?
Yeah, I'm so for that.
But in America, we have to choose, right? So that's where I push back on like the onus being on women to like be at home or in their jobs. In other countries, they don't have to choose.
I would argue that even after a year, you still want to be with your kids.
But some women,
not putting them in daycare at 2 years old.
Some women don't want to.
Totally.
Right.
I'm just talking about the majority.
I also want to push back and say like historically, this idea of like the woman in the home and that being like true family values, there is only one decade in the US history where like middle class women could stay home. And that was the 50s. Before that, the only women who could stay home were people with more money because before that, men were either at war or women were out in the fields with their husbands working. My grandma, my great grandma always said, we had the babies around us picking cotton. Like we did not work. My grandma had a master's degree. She was the breadwinner because my grandpa was a pastor, and all of her girls were going to go to college because she valued education. Yeah. It wasn't about get a job. It was like, I just want you to be educated. I want you to know a lot because she was an educator. And then like once the 70s hit after the 60s and the men came back home from war, then it just wasn't feasible in America anymore to have a one income household. That became only for people making over a certain amount of money. Women have always, for the most part, worked.
Yeah, well, I think
so we've created this.
So work like in the field with your family.
Sure.
Still
have earned money. Yeah. We'll say that way, right?
A lot of women, you have your side hustle, you have your Etsy shop, you have different things that people are doing for sure, and
so just looking at it, like
I'm not sure the 70s is right though. When is because I mean I grew up in the the 90s, and I think everyone I knew, most moms I knew were stay-at-home moms in the 90s.
Yeah, so where I'm from, no.
Interesting.
Being from the rural Midwest, both parents worked.
Interesting.
So it might also be dependent on region, Sure. But I would I guess I just bring that up to say like I don't even know exactly how we got on this, but like in terms of career and whatnot. Oh, I think just because timeline, right? Like, or even for me, it wasn't that I was like, I want this big grandiose career. It was just like, I went into acting. Yeah. And that was not the time to be like having kids or getting married. It didn't work out for me. I was with a guy for 3 years that I thought I was going to end up with. And we broke up for like, we both wanted different things. So like, I think the power of the beautiful thing about living in America now, especially, is the power of choice for a lot of people. And like if you choose a certain way that doesn't align with marriage and kids, I don't think you should like have to stifle your relationship and sexual experiences or delay that.
So you're like, because I chose not to get married young, and a lot of people do, then like that's unrealistic to expect people to not have sex till they're in their mid-30s.
Definitely.
So let's then get back to sex.
Yeah, let's get back to sex.
Yeah,
why not?
Let's talk about sex. In your mind, is sex a sacred experience?
Sometimes. And sometimes it's like, wow, that sucked. I'd rather go eat French fries and never talk to that person again. That was my experience.
Should sex be a sacred experience?
Yeah. I was having that conversation. Should sex? I don't know. Okay. I don't want to say, yeah, let me think about this. sometimes sex can just be fun. It doesn't have to be so serious. I think I had this conversation with a nun one time. She was talking about like, you know, how they were like, you know, saving women from Planned Parenthood from getting abortions and whatnot. And we just like, and she was using this like language around like, you know, shame and, you know, you don't have to be ashamed. God has lifted that sin from you, women who have gotten abortions. So she's talking about it in this like framework of the abortion was sin and da da da. And then I shared with her my story of Planned Parenthood and how they saved my life after I was raped. And they gave me all of these resources to get healing and help and whatever. And
Sorry.
thank you. Yeah. Yeah, it's a big part of my story. And another reason why I'm very passionate about like educating women on like sex and sex education and body autonomy and everything. And I shared my story with her and I said, I think that the language, or could it be that the language you're using around sex and around the abortion, the shame and everything that, and like how it should be, it can be sacred, it can be this beautiful thing, that's actually making her feel worse about something that, I mean, it's kind of like pouring salt on the wound, right? She already doesn't feel great about it. And now you're using all of this really lofty language, sin, sacred. It's really sometimes, and I'm not saying this about abortion, but I'm saying about, they do the same thing with sex and Christianity and like religion. And I think sometimes sex really can just be fun. And it's like a mutually respectful thing and you have a good time. And then yeah, you see each other in a pub a couple of years down the road and you're like, hey, what's up? It doesn't have to be that serious. However, it should always be respectful and it should always be mutual and it should always be enthusiastically consensual. Right. I will say that. Sex can be sacred. And I will say that I have had like what I would call sacred sexual experiences, but not within a marriage, right? I've never been married, but I've definitely had like sacred sexual experiences.
Well, firstly, I'm so sorry that that happened to you. That should have never happened to you. And that's a horrific act of violence that should never happen to anyone. And I'm so sorry. Well, for me, I do think that sex is best when it's a sacred experience. And I think if it doesn't mean anything, like we're taught that like sex doesn't have to mean anything, then why does it feel so crummy for someone to use you for sex?
I don't think that sex doesn't mean anything.
Right. Well, but if it's not sacred, it's just fun. If it's just fun and it doesn't mean anything super sacred and special, then why does it hurt so bad if someone uses you for it?
Because it's still, I don't know. I mean, using someone for sex, I don't know. If it's violent or if you just feel like a masturbation.
It's like you were used, you know, like this is a pretty common story, I think, where especially women might go into a relationship feeling like feelings, because I actually think there's data on it, which you probably have feelings about too, that women can feel more emotional connection to sex sometimes where it's than it is for men sometimes, and maybe more often than not, right, for women than men. And so a lot of women, there's so many stories of women who go into a relationship like feeling these really great feelings. One thing leads to another. They end up having sex when maybe they wouldn't have if she didn't feel maybe a little pressured or different things like that. And then after that, the guy doesn't ever call her again. And you feel used, like he just did what he had to do to seduce you into having sex. Yeah. If it's just for fun, why does that feel so horrible? And so many women feel such crap from that.
I think it's for a lot of reasons that maybe we, reduce to the sexual act, but actually it's everything around it. It's the fact that we make women feel like they're dumb for believing a guy. I have a chapter in my book called Too Soon that talks about this idea of sleeping with a guy too soon, and that's why he stops being interested in you. And I kind of break down why that's bull. Sorry. And the problem with that narrative. So I think in that situation, why does she feel crummy? Because she feels lied to. That guy fully took advantage of her. He lied to her. He took advantage of her. He manipulated her. That feels crappy, whether it ends in sex or not.
But it would not feel near as bad if it didn't end in sex. Because if the guy is just having, flirting with you and he's leading you on, and then you never get a phone call, that is not the same as if you had sex.
As if you were physically intimate with him.
Yeah, if you got naked with him, had sex with him, and then he never calls you back, that is nowhere near the same as like he's flirting with you at dinner and never calls you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's meaningful.
It is meaningful.
It's really powerful. And
yeah.
It should be. It's supposed to be sacred. In an ideal way. I think it's okay to put weight to certain things. And like, yes, you don't want to make someone feel guilt and shame if they regret doing something. I would never want that for someone. I would never want to make someone feel bad for a past decision they made that they are feeling bad about. No way. But I think it's okay to like put some weight to an experience that bonds you.
Yeah.
And so if we make it like, oh, it can be for fun. Yeah, it can be sacred, or it can be just fun. I don't agree. I don't think I think that minimizes the beauty and the importance of sex.
I think that there's a tendency to speak about it in a binary. Like if I'm saying it can just be for fun, then I'm saying like it's not sacred or it's not important. And that's not what I'm saying.
Right.
I think another reason why a woman could feel bad about that is like the cultural narrative around like placing the blame on yourself. Like instead of like, I talked about this with my therapist a few times. Like, instead of looking to the man and being like, that's really messed up that you did that. Totally. Hey, why don't you stop acting like that? What do? Well, you fell for it. You should have known better. Yeah. You end up blaming women for men acting horribly. Yeah. We let them, it's ever, right? It's like within the worst ways, it's like blaming women for being sexually assaulted. What were you wearing? Well, you went back to his apartment. Were you kissing him? Okay, but none of those things mean that I wanted to have sex with him. And actually I said, I don't want to have sex with you. Like I couldn't have been clearer, right? Totally. Like all of these ways that we put the onus on women instead of reflecting back, that guy acted like an a-hole. And instead, so I think the tendency is for women, because we're so trained to blame ourselves when we're mistreated. That's another reason why she could feel so bad. I hear what you're saying, that flirting at dinner, whatever, it doesn't feel nearly as bad. Sure. But I would also push back because I never had sex with my college boyfriend, who was my first love. I loved him deeply. Yeah. And I talk about this in the book. It took me a solid 5 years to get over him. And I had to undo all of these narratives that were intertwined with evangelicalism and purity culture about my worth being wrapped up in being chosen. I always say, any girl who grew up in evangelicalism, your kink is being chosen. And like, it just is. And like, and it's like, the patriarchy at large, but it's a big one.
I personally that's not how I feel it, but that's okay.
It's because it means something about your worth. If like a man of God chooses you, like all of these things.
I definitely chose him. Like, I sought him out. Like I was the one that AOL instant messaging was like, hey, like that. Like I was the one who was like, do you want to go pants shopping with me?
Wow, bold.
I was, yes. And he was like this shy guy. Like I definitely chose him.
I definitely chose my college boyfriend too. I talk about that in the book. Like I definitely just like was on his Facebook creeping him, like whatever, picking him out in the dining hall, whatever. But when we broke up, it took me a solid 5 years to get over him. We never had sex. And then I could have sex with these guys that I was seeing in New York. And I was like, oh, I never want to see you again. Talk about, like,
right. And I definitely think your mindset where you're at is huge.
But I think if you're emotionally excited about someone and then you have sex, yes, like it is. But like, I think if it's just sex alone, like that doesn't make you emotionally tied to a person, right? And you don't necessarily feel defiled. I will say, and actually in situations that I can speak to personally, I have been very interested in a guy, and then we have sex and I feel like I'm okay, I feel like I might as well be a blow-up doll. Like, you're not involving me in this experience at all. I am literally just a hole. And I didn't walk away from that experience feeling grossed out about myself or feeling ashamed. I was like, that tells me so much about him, and I don't want to see him anymore. So I don't know. I think I do think it's important. I want to be very clear. Like, I think it's so important when we teach kids about sex and everything to not make it seem like sex is not important. It is. It's an emotional thing. It's not just a physical thing. But I think to paint it as like it always has to be sacred or like,
well, for example, that's that story you just gave. Like, wouldn't it have better if you didn't have to go through that experience where the guy used you as a whole?
But
like,
I didn't.
That would have been better. You could have figured out that guy was a scumbag without that.
What if I didn't figure it out?
You could have. You could have. Are we saying that you couldn't have figured out this guy was a total jerk? That until he had sex with you, there's no way to figure out this guy was a jerk? That you had to be a hole for him? A vessel for him like that?
I'm not saying, here's what I'm not, no, because like he was not a great person.
So then wouldn't it have been better to have not gone through that experience?
Yes, sure. But I will also say that there's sort of this idea in sex only until marriage that as long as you're just attracted to a person and that you feel some sort of like sexual chemistry with them, that the sex will just be great. And that has not been my experience.
Talk about that. Too.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about that.
That has not been, because what if I married him?
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, so I want to answer that. But I think first, just like rounding out that, like why I think it is such a good idea to wait is just partially for these other reasons we'll get into now, but also partially just because the social data does show that the less sexual partners you have, the more likely you're going to have a better marriage with no cheating, less likely to have cheating, less likely for divorce, which can affect families negatively. Children of divorce have higher rates of mental issues or abuse or incarceration, like different things like that. There's so many reasons that it is good for family and society that the less sexual partners you have, the better and more higher likelihood of like a good family structure. That's my thoughts on that. But let's get into the thing about you might not have good sex if you don't have sex with them before married. What are your thoughts on that?
The first time I had sex, the guy, I guess the first time I had like penetrative sex, yeah, I was like, that was really like a big catalyst for me breaking down all the ways I had been lied to about sex. Cause I was like, what if I had married that? And this is not to body shame, but not everybody's bodies go together. And I was basically taught that if I remain a virgin, to get explicit, everything will feel good because I'll just be a tight little holy hole. And that was not the case. And I thought I would bleed. I thought it would be it was not. I basically was not a great experience. And I just kept thinking, what if I had married that? Like, that would have been so devastating. One, because he was a bad lover. And two, just because like our bodies didn't work together. And I have been attracted to men that I have dated and then I sleep with them. And it is a totally different story because how someone is sexually like in the bedroom can be very different than just making out with them. Very different. And I had so many experiences where I was like, wow, that energy is so different in the bedroom than like being attracted to someone doesn't translate to having good sex. And in my experience. And so I think you definitely, like, the longer you're with someone and the more communication you have, the better you figure out each other's bodies, you share what you like, what you don't like, and you learn that together, the better the sex gets, for sure. But in some cases, it is a non-starter. You're just not sexually compatible. And there is this lie that, like, oh, if you just like each other, you'll just be sexually compatible. But that's just, in my experience, not been true.
Okay, so I would say from my personal experience that our sex in the beginning was nowhere near what it is now. We didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah.
It might not have been the best sex we're ever having like now. But you know what it was? It was super secure. It was super safe. It was with my best friend. It was the most trusted, loving, exciting experience because it was us. It was like me and you against the world. And yeah, we're not having the most amazing sex like when we on our first times having sex. But it was beautiful because it was with my best friend and it was with someone that I loved so much. And then over time, you figure it out.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean everybody figures it out. And I think there's a lot more nuance and layers to why some people don't have good sex and why they do. I don't think it's necessarily like a compatibility thing or necessarily you're just not good at sex. I think more often than not, it's more just like the openness to learn and how to communicate with each other, how to figure out what makes you feel good, what makes you feel good, how can we work on this together. Learning from like outside sources. For instance, I don't advocate for pornography. I'm very against pornography, but I do think there are other sources like Kim Anami, for instance. I don't even know who she is. She's like an awesome sex therapist that has these great courses on like how to maximize your sex life, how to be like the best, like how to be like the most just amazing sex goddess you can be. And then she has courses for men too. And it is not pornography at all, but it is teaching you how to be like great at sex and how to love your sex and how to feel like have the best orgasms, all different things like that. Like there's such a learning curve that, let me say again, does not need to involve pornography, in my opinion, that you can develop over time. And there are people, that are probably in loveless marriages. They've only ever slept with each other. 20 years down the road, they have terrible sex. Maybe they're lucky if they have sex once every 6 months. Like that's a real thing. But I would not say that's because they've only ever had sex with each other. I would say that's because they're having marital problems and they're not showing up for each other. They're not doing the work that it takes.
Or they married the wrong person.
Potentially, yeah, but I do. I think that potentially.
I think a lot of people
but I
marry the wrong person because they think they need to wait to have sex, so they rush to getting married to someone they shouldn't have gotten married to.
But like, what would make someone the wrong person? Let's say we're starting with a baseline of like a good person who is respectable and loving. Like, what makes someone the wrong person other than like you fall out of chemistry, you fall out of love? Like, what makes them the wrong person? Because I think the beginning stages of love is very exciting every time. And then down the road, 50 years from now, it's not just I married the wrong person. It's did we work at it? Did we continually work to stay in love, be committed for life, and like love each other and serve each other to our fullest heart? Like that's what makes a marriage good long term, not just, oh, we're no longer like feeling chemistry anymore, because it's not the same. Andrew and I have been together for over 20 years now. It is not, I don't get butterflies when I see him, but when we are alone together and being intimate together, and when we have just alone time, like dates and stuff, like we're best friends because we're working at it. But that doesn't mean that it's always great. We definitely have had years of our life where we're just like not feeling it, struggling, like working at like, how do we like fall back in love? How do we love each other into a way to where we like feel good with each other? And it just takes work. And then you fall back in love. And it's like, I feel like that's the wrong word because you love the person, but falling in love is a different word than just loving the person, right? Like you're in love again because we're in the right place and we're working at it. So yeah, that's my argument there. I don't think it's necessarily you married the wrong person. If you married someone who's good and true and respectful and you've had chemistry in the beginning, like it just takes work.
Yeah, to an extent, I agree with that. But you know, I've seen a lot of my friends through relationships at this point, and your question of like what makes it like them the wrong person. I think a lot of people in and out of like doing it because they thought they needed to get married or whatever. They rush into something with someone they're not actually compatible with because of the accolade of getting married.
Yeah, and they're like rushing to have sex.
And you said that you were with him for 6 years. Many of my friends who got married quick or whatever, they like weren't with their partner for that long. And those are the situations where they just didn't know the other person well enough to know if they were truly compatible. Like when you get married in the honeymoon phase, like you haven't had time to go through a fight to see how the other person traverses conflict. You haven't had time to see the person through a hard thing. Like, you know, when I met my partner, I was so excited about him. You know, I've spent 12 years single in New York City. Like I had run the gamut of dating experiences. I'd been very intentional about my dating. And you know, after years of just sort of like spaghetti slinging, I've healed my sexual trauma. I've done all this work, right? And I finally find someone that I'm like compatible with, and I feel like our values are aligned.
For you.
Thank you. And he's so amazing and he's so wonderful. And so I'm super excited, right? And I'm like, like 4 months in, I'm like, how do you feel about marriage?
Mhm.
And he's like New Jersey Italian, like super, I don't know, secular, like was not raised religious at all. And he's like, whoa, slow down, and now we've been together for 2 years, and which isn't even that long, but in our time together, like we lived together, he got laid off, like I was going through a bunch of like health struggles. We've gone through some things together, so I can see how Ken navigates hard things, how is he open to therapy, is he open, these are things if you haven't gone through any of that stuff, and then all of a sudden you've bound yourself through a marriage. That's what I mean, like by you got in a marriage with the wrong person, or you end up with someone and they become an addict and they refuse to get help, like there are so many things that can happen. That's what I mean by like you married the wrong person, or you just evolve. Like, let's say you get married and you were both like, working in ministry. And then this happens a lot. One person in the marriage like deconstructs their faith and the other one doesn't. All of a sudden, your values are very different. Mm-hmm. Can you truly stay with a person if your values are so misaligned, right? Like, I think it's beautiful. Like when I hear you talk about your partner, like that's how my parents feel. Mm-hmm. They feel they got very, very lucky. But it's just not everybody's story.
Here's what's at the top of my Christmas list this year to get glowing gifts under $50 for every person on my list. Osea has these incredible new limited edition holiday sets. You guys know I love Osea, which is a clean, vegan, cruelty-free, seaweed-based skin and body care brand that's family operated since 1996. And right now they have 2 thoughtful edits, all wrapped up for the holidays and bundled for savings. First, their bestsellers minis collection is a limited edition 6-piece set of face and body bestsellers in travel size for your travel loving friends. The price is $78 with a value of $110 and a 29% savings. It comes in a beautiful box for gifting and includes their ocean cleanser, the hyaluronic sea serum, which gives your skin the perfect moisture boost, the atmosphere protection cream, which is a lightweight barrier moisturizer, the incredible Salts of the Earth body scrub, the Undaria algae body oil, and the anti-aging body balm for firming hydration and silky skin. Next is their Super Glow body set. This limited edition 3-piece set is for those who want the ultimate everything shower. It includes 2 full-size bestsellers and 1 travel size, all in a custom box that's perfect for gifting. The price is $72 with a value of $106 and a 32% savings. It includes the Undaria algae body wash, which is their new seaweed boosted body wash I'm currently obsessed with. It cleanses and removes impurities, leaving skin smooth and revitalized, and it smells incredible. Next, it includes the Undaria algae body oil for after the shower. This oil is clinically proven to instantly improve the look of skin elasticity and deliver deep moisturization. And lastly, the hyaluronic body serum, which is clinically proven lightweight body serum that instantly boosts skin's hydration by 161% and improves your natural moisture barrier for visibly smooth skin. This holiday season, grab these sets. This is gifting made easy, packed in a beautiful box and ready to go. And right now you can get an extra 10% off stacked on top of this already incredible deal with my code LOVE10. Available while supplies last, so be sure to shop early.
Well, I guess I don't know if I would feel that I feel like I got lucky to meet him when we did. Like, I'm really glad that I didn't have to go through the dating scene in the mid-30s. Like, I'm sorry.
And you had to have babies when you were like,
when I was young.
Point,
yes, for sure. But I don't know if I would consider it luck. There were multiple times where it's like, if we didn't work at it really, like we could have ended up like everybody else. Like, it takes so much work and intentionality to be willing to humble yourself. And it takes 2 people to tango. So yeah, of course, if one person's becoming an addict, like, I mean, that's a totally different situation. But I'm talking about
the other person.
Totally. But there's multiple points that you brought up where it's like, you know what? I didn't know how my husband felt about that before we got married, because we were teenagers, right? And we dated 6 years. And yeah, there might be some strain there, but then we work it out. And even religiously, like Andrew and I were both raised Christian. And then there were certain points where like he might become more this way and I'm becoming like, I'm not sure what I think about this. I'm not sure. And it was hard for a couple years.
Yeah.
But then we learned, this is how we respect each other. This is how we listen and learn from each other and be open and hold space for each other. Like, it takes just growth and effort. It's like marriage, lifelong marriage is like so much commitment and work. I don't think there's anybody who's been married for 50 plus years that would say it was just a breeze and we just got lucky. Like, it takes work. And so even if you marry somebody that like, you're gonna have hard times. Friendships have hard times.
Yeah.
Even lifelong friendships where you're like, ride or die, we click and we love it. Like, you can still have really hard times in friendships, you know? But anyways, I feel like we've exhausted this topic unless there's something else you want to say. I have some more questions to ask you.
Go for it.
Okay. So purity culture, right? Like, can you define what purity culture is to you? And do you think hookup culture can also be toxic?
Yeah. So purity culture is the idea that mostly women, but it is technically, I guess, for men too, that they're...
I sense your annoyance.
Yeah, it's not really, but mostly women, the idea that our value or your value is tied to your ability to not just wait to have sex until you're married or to have sex with one person, but to save every single sexual urge, sexual thought, sexual activity, be as sexually pure as possible. And if and it's not just the belief that that's the right way for me or for my family. It's the belief that it is the right way for everyone. So that's purity culture. Because and then is hookup culture toxic? Yes. Yes. It's just such a freaking pendulum swing. Like in our culture, it's just like there's no, America is so freaking weird about sex. Like it's such a binary. This idea that you're either like spaghetti slinging, drunk, having sex with anybody, or you're waiting till marriage to like ever think a sexual thought. It's like, what about the happy medium where you are fully present in your decision making? You have what I call a panty entry policy, which is you know who you want to have sex with and why, what characteristics do they display, under what conditions do I feel safe? Do I know how to feel safe? All things purity culture doesn't teach you, by the way. It doesn't even teach you how to feel safe. It teaches you how to like dismiss your own feelings, and that's why their purity culture is like an incubator for abusers, but that's a whole other thing. And hookup so the middle ground is like, I know myself, I know my body, I know what my values are, I know what my moral compass is, I know under what conditions I have great sexual experiences and under what the qualities of a great sexual partner, and then I make decisions accordingly. One of the things that is very frustrating about being someone on the internet that like speaks about sex is this idea that I'm just like DTF. Like I'm super open. I'm like into nipple clamps and butt plugs and like woohoo, let's go orgies. That's not me. That's fine if that is someone, but like that's not me. And then also I get immediately sexualized because I talk about sex. Again, going back to the binary, like I can't just be a woman talking about sex. It's part of our nature. It's part of who we are just as much as like eating or sleeping. So why are you immediately sexualizing me for like talking about something? Anyway, so actually in my process of coming out of purity culture to the city that never sleeps and never stops sleeping around and figuring out my sexual ethic within that environment was figuring out my selection process and coming up with what I call my own blueprint for boning. Like, what feels right for me? What kind of partners do I feel safe with? And guess what? You can't do that if you're drunk. And by the way, and I've talked about this very openly, it was so hard for me in the beginning to like know my sexual ethic and figure it out because none of my girlfriends were really figuring it out either. They were all it was super normalized to have like drunk hookups. And once I got into sexual trauma therapy and everything, and I started realizing how often I was not an active participant in my sexual experiences, that mostly I was dissociating, which was a trauma response where I knew I was there, but I don't remember anything about it. Or I was drunk and I blacked out because I was intoxicated. That's so unsafe. How can you be having a positive experience if you're so intoxicated, you don't even know what you're doing? But that's what we harbor in American culture because we're so shameful about sex, and then compound that with like college drinking and all the narratives around boys and boys will be boys. And anyway, it's just very convoluted. So yes, I think hookup culture can be super, super toxic. It's dehumanizing, right? You're not getting to know a person, and it doesn't teach women how and when to feel safe, just to like drink enough Chardonnay and it'll be fun. So yeah.
So you said that our culture shames sex. You feel that way.
Yes.
Because I kind of feel like I'm in the minority here. This ideal to, I think it's beneficial to wait until marriage to have sex, I think is such a minority voice. I think so few people are actually advocating that or speaking about that. To me, it feels like we're in a culture that is so sex normative to just sleep with whoever, and that there's no consequences for it. And like sleep with whoever type of thing is the culture that I see.
Yeah, well, I would say that America is a culture that is obsessed with sex, but no one's talking about it in a productive way.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
That it's just not being talked about. Like, this is why we're having this
Yeah,
conversation.
yeah.
And I'm sure your book is going to be so helpful for people. Can you talk about your book?
Yeah. So I talk about it's called God, Sex, and Rich People, a Recovering Evangelical Testimony. And it, one of the taglines in the synopsis is figuring out, public transportation and how to have good sex without hating myself.
Wait, what does that have to do with public transportation?
Just like figuring out New York.
Okay, let's
right?
metaphor.
Like, yeah, like in New York. Yeah. From figuring out public transportation to how to have good sex without hating myself. Yeah. So I talk about my journey from purity rings to sex with pop stars to learning how to have sex without hating myself. And, yeah, for me, I feel like I have really covered the gamut from purity culture to hookup culture to getting to a point where I feel like very confident in my sexual ethic, but I had to like fight for it and really like learn for myself. And again, it came at like a high cost. And this isn't so much in the book, because the book only covers like my first 3 to 4 years of deconstruction. But I did eventually experience date rape, and then I went to sexual trauma therapy, and that really got me into like the minutia of how purity culture still was showing up in my life, even though I thought I had like knocked down all the pillars of it. Right. And I don't want to give too much away, but yeah. It's my journey through my sexual experiences and my religious experiences and working for the 1%,
Yeah. Well, you're a very good writer. I read one of your blog posts about having sex with a doorman. And
No, I didn't have sex with him.
Wait, I thought you ended up having sex with him after you moved out of the apartment.
No, we dated, but we never had sex. I think that's like the last line is like, so Colin, if you're reading this, I never the doorman. I never slept with the doorman, because I actually did end up sleeping with him, because I can't remember how I end the blog post, but in the book, if you read the chapter, basically what I realized is that I dated the doorman for 4 months and we never slept together. And I realized that I had this disconnect between like men that I saw as like potential boyfriends and men that I didn't. And like, so I was basically like chaff and weeding myself, like, because I saw my sexual, like, I didn't know this, right? This was subconscious, but because I saw the sexual part of me as bad, I would only share that part of me with men that I didn't want to see me as good. So if there were guys who were like real potential, like boyfriend options, I wouldn't sleep with them because I didn't want to like defile their vision of me. But with guys who I didn't, like, I would sleep with guys who treated me like crap or like whatever, who I didn't care about them seeing me as bad.
Yeah. And so your experience that you weren't raised in a way to have a healthy sexual view of sex. And so then when you decided to sleep with other people, you went through a lot of hardship.
Oh yeah. I had no skills. I had no sexual education. I like literally had to go to Planned Parenthood to just like ask them questions because I didn't know anything.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you think that sex can complicate relationships where you don't have a strong bond and trust with?
Oh, can you give me an example?
Well, like if you sleep with someone before you have a strong bond and before you can really trust them, does that complicate the relationship at all?
I don't think it complicates it necessarily. I think it just comes down to I don't think it complicates it, only because I just do, at least me personally, I see sex as a really important part of the dating process, because I have been in situations where like you're sexually incompatible and like you want to know how that person shows up, and how they show up sexually tells me a lot about them. And so I don't know that it complicates it, but I think if you sleep with someone before you're really ready, or before they've given you signs of like what you would want to see, like before you know their level of interest and all of that, before you're ready, then it can be disappointing when you like stop talking or something like that. But complicates, I mean, unless they have like an STD or something and they weren't honest with you about that, or, you know, I don't know. I don't think so.
And that's bringing up STDs. That's another reason I think to have less sexual partners, and you're more likely to have STIs from more sexual partners that you have.
Yeah, I push back on that only because there just are so many like ways to protect yourself. Like we just don't learn them. I mean, you probably did, because California, I think, is the only state in America with mandated comprehensive sex ed.
I went to a Christian school.
Oh, you went to
I went to a private. We did not have any sexual.
You definitely didn't then.
No.
But I do know that California is the only state with mandated comprehensive sex ed, which means they have to teach you about condoms and their efficacy and all of that. But I certainly didn't learn that. And so far too often I didn't use them because I didn't think they worked. So I was like, why? That's what I learned. I learned in abstinence only education, which is not true, but that like condoms are only 70% effective or something like that. It is true that, you know, the more people you sleep with, like you are increasing your risk, but that's like, I mean, that's true of any illness. So why is it, or any sort of virus, I guess I would say. So why do we like stigmatize STIs, but not like the flu? Like kids literally go to school and they're just like freaking petri dishes, you know?
Well, I think for
like,
me,
why is chlamydia different than a cold?
It's different. You don't think so?
I mean, they're treated, you get an antibiotic, like it goes away, it doesn't stick with you forever. If you get it multiple times and it's untreated, it can have long-term effects, but like, no.
Because sometimes people don't even know they have it. But I feel like with the flu, you know you have it, so you know how to.
I could be totally wrong, but at least with my friends that have had chlamydia, like the symptoms are pretty obvious.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I've never had it. So.
Yeah. Same. And but I've also had friends who have literally their whole lives, they've been in nothing but not monogamous relationships and gotten HPV because dudes carry it and they're silent carriers. So a woman could have sex with one guy. And he could have maybe had sex with one person.
Yeah, well, it's possible, you know? But your likelihood of getting one is much higher the more sexual partners.
Yeah, but I mean, I do have a friend who, she had I would call it a sexually related disease that was not sexually transmitted. But look, like vagicism, how do you say that?
I don't know.
Vagicismus? That, thank you. Vaginismus, which is, do you know, are you familiar?
No.
It's a sexually related response, which is like you basically sex is really, really, really painful because your vagina muscles just clamp, and it's a traumatic response. And it's super common in women coming out of purity culture or like high control environments in general around sexuality. Or like I had a friend who had a sexually related but not sexually transmitted necessarily. And she only ever had one partner. And it is something she and her husband still have to deal with. But it's sexually related, right? And I had a friend who literally was with one guy for 6 years and is now married to the guy she, you know, and she found out she got HPV. And like her partner that she's currently with only ever had one other partner. So like,
yeah, there's going to be outliers.
To stigmatize it as like, oh, you're getting this because you're having so much sex. It's like, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, do you think that women can tend to be more emotionally tied to men when it comes to sex? Because like my perspective of sex is that it's the most vulnerable that you can be with someone physically and emotionally. And so it's an emotional tie, and that's not to put any kind of shame for someone who has sex with someone that they're not going to be tied with for life, right? But I think it is an emotional bond. And do you think that women tend to be more emotionally tied than men to sex? And how should we navigate that if that's true? Because of the mental health of women, you know?
Yeah, I don't know if it's so hard to say. I guess like in short, yes, but it's hard to know of like why. Is it because women are more, I don't necessarily want to say like emotional, because I feel like that has such a, I don't know, like she's unhinged emotionally or whatever, we're crazy or whatever, but we are more deeply in feeling and sensory, right? Could we say that? And we are the receivers, right? And again, this is literally only talking about like straight people sex. This is probably a totally different conversation if you have like the LGBTQ community talking about this. Like, I imagine the conversation between like two women having sex is very different, right? Like, but if we're talking about just heteronormative, men, I think, are actually far more emotional about sex and sexual intimacy, in my experience. The problem is the narrative around it. I have had enough experiences with men who have performance anxiety because, right, to be masculine is so tied to your sexual performance as a man. And so if they can't like show up and like do a good job to this girl that they're really interested in, there's a lot there for them, right?
And would you say they would be less likely to have that anxiety with someone who's your best friend that you're committed to for life because you have that close bond and you don't have that stress and anxiety of like, are they going to ditch me?
Are they going to leave
not
me?
good at having sex?
Yeah.
Because I don't think being good at having sex is a you either are or you aren't.
I agree with
you
that.
know?
Yeah. But I do think
because the way you were at having sex the first time versus the way you're at having sex now is going to be a lot different. And
Right.
not because you had however many partners, it's because of the amount of times you've had sex. Would you say that that's true?
I wouldn't, yeah, but I would say it's hugely dependent on my partners and me. So I don't know that like men and women will ever be fully equal in their emotional experience of sex, but I do think that men are far more emotionally tied to it than we give them permission to be.
No, I guess
Because one of the ways that I feel like I learned to be a better lover was to actually like cultivate a space, an environment for men to feel like they could be vulnerable, for my partners to feel like they could feel safe and vulnerable. And I could say like, hey, because I had some partners do that for me. And I realized what a game changer it was to just know the safety, right? So what I would say is that, to your point of like, wouldn't it be so much better if you knew you were with your best friend, yada, yada, yada. I think, which I think that I don't mean to say that in a dismissive way. I'm so sorry.
Take it like
that came off so rude.
No, don't worry.
That there is something to that, but I would say that it can also be that environment can be established without marriage. It can be like, I respect you. You are safe here. I am not judging you. Sex is like, this is just another way for us to connect. Like, I just like you and I want our connection to go more deep, like deeper. So I don't know, but in my experience, I've been able to like really help men be like more calm and more connected by like establishing that setting.
But I do think that sex can create a false sense of closeness with someone because it is such an emotionally tying experience and vulnerable experience that you could feel emotionally close to someone that you had sex with, but you barely know. And that can, because of the release of oxytocin during sex, like you'll choose to make different decisions from having a sexual relationship with them than if you were leaving sex off the table and truly getting to know the person for who they are and finding that, like, I feel like love is patient and it is kind and it is worth the wait because you're falling in love with them for who they are, not choosing to marry them for how good they are at sex. Not saying that's the only reason you would marry someone. I'm sure that wouldn't be the only reason, but I think that good sex develops over time with connection and mutual respect and love, and it's worth the wait.
I agree to an extent because I think when you siphon sex off as like not being part of the equation that makes you attracted to a person, you're just like, why that and not their brain? Like, why their genitals but not their arm? Or whatever, like, it's just as much a part of them as anything else. But when we highlight it as this like more important, more sacred thing, like, or that you can put off until later, it's like, no, it's still a part of them. And it's a very important part of them. So why are we like saying that's the one thing that you can get to know later? Why that and not their emotions? Why that and not their brain?
Well, I guess because I don't think it's like so much as a getting to know. Like, I don't think sex is like, this is my sex personality. This is my sex character. This is how I am in sex. I think that that's something, again, that can develop. So it's not like, it's going to be a surprise. Yes, it will be a surprise, right? But if you don't have past sexual experiences, you are so much less likely to compare because you don't know what you don't know. And so it's a lot more innocent than it is like, ooh, he's not as good as that guy I had sex with. He's not as good as that guy. Oh, that guy was much better in this way. This guy's a little bit good in this way. There's so much less it's not complicated. It's like, it's just like, it's something that you do when you're committed for life and you get to know the person through every other way. And leaving sex off the table, I think, doesn't complicate it as much.
So I do talk about spoiler, I do talk about in the book, like the first guy that I fell in love with, ironically, after I left purity culture and after I had like done all of this work around sex and everything, was very religious. He was Romanian Orthodox and he was saving himself until marriage. So in our first like 5 months, we weren't having sex, and given the time where I was in my journey, that was what I needed. I needed sex to be taken off the table. I was so exhausted. I was so disappointed. I was like trying to have good sex. Anyway, it goes more into it in the book, but like, I was just like, actually, this is a freaking relief. Like, cool, but I was also okay with it because I knew it was temporary. Like I was like, well, we're not going to be together forever. Like he lives in Romania, I don't think I would have been as open to it if like we were looking to date for like, in my mind, it was like, well, this has an expiration date, so let's just have fun. Who cares? But then like, I actually ended up, because of that time with him, I will say it helped me to navigate the timeline to which, how much do I want to know about a person? How much do I want to feel connected to a person before we have sex? Because we did eventually end up having sex. It also helped me to really figure out and enjoy all the other stuff around sex, right? I realized how much I was just sort of like elevating penetrative sex as the only kind of sexual experience. There's a whole bunch of other stuff I could have been doing, and like got to explore that intimacy with him. And so actually taking penetrative sex off the table for a while was very helpful to me at one point. And so I can acknowledge that, right? But eventually it was his decision that he wanted to share this with me. And he was like, I love you so much. And this couldn't possibly be bad if like we're this full of love, And so it was his choice ultimately. And I just say that because I do totally hear you that you there is something about keeping it uncomplicated by just getting to know them as a person and all of that. But for me, like, I know this isn't going to be anything in the timeline of like, you waited 6 years, but with my current partner, I think we waited like 2 months, and that's like forever in New York world, right? But because I was at a point in my life where I was like, I really want a partner. I want a boyfriend. I'm not trying, if you talk to Ken, he'd say the same thing. Like he'd use more crass language, but he was like, I wasn't just looking to have sex with someone. Like I wanted a relationship. And so he was fine with waiting. He had no problem with it. He was like, great, and that's fine, and he let me call the shots of like when I was ready. And it was when I felt like, okay, this guy's like in it. We're definitely going to be together for a while. And there's not an arbitrary timeline. It was just like when I felt, and when he had vocalized it, right? Like he asked me to be his girlfriend, like whatever. So I don't know, for me, pleasure is important in a relationship. It really, really is.
I agree with you.
Important
Let me
as
just tell you,
yeah.
I agree.
So for me, like if I don't know how that is going to be in my dynamic with a person, and I'm not saying it doesn't grow, it absolutely does. You're totally right. The first time I had sex with Ken, he had a cast on his like left hand because he had a freaking broken pinky. And so the whole time he was afraid he was going to like whack me in the head. So it was really funny. Like it was a funny scene, right? Like, of course it's gotten better since then.
Yeah.
But like I still knew him and like our energy. And that was enough for me.
And I think someone's energy if you're choosing to marry them. And I think it's beautiful the way you can grow in your sex. But again, it takes a lot of intentionality. There's a lot of people that aren't having good sex after being married for a long time.
Right.
But do you think that it's possible your perspectives on waiting until marriage might be different, like to have sex, if you didn't have the trauma that you did growing up, feeling like you have to do it or else shame, bad, like, you're not like, you're a sinner, you are not God, you're not looked upon in God's eyes in a good way. Like if you didn't have that experience, is it possible you might see it in a more positive light?
Probably.
Yeah.
But I think that, I mean, I personally don't know anyone who was raised sex positive and religious. Like,
I guess I would consider sex positive.
Yeah.
It would be different than what you consider sex positive. Like, I feel like I had a very good experience of laying the groundwork of what good sex should be and could be. And I was raised with, conversations that led me to make the choice for myself that I want to wait until marriage to have sex. And I'm really, really glad that I did. At the same time, I also can learn from my experience, like growing up thinking, oh, I didn't really feel like I maybe had permission to explore other ideas of truth just in general when it comes to religion. And not just about religion, but with anything, I want to raise my kids in a way where I say, look, this is what I believe. This is what your dad believes, not just about religion, but anything. Right. And as you get older, you're going to have to make that decision for yourself. You're going to have to figure out what you believe or what do you think? Like if they ask me a hard question about something like faith-wise, I'm like, well, I'm not sure. What do you think?
Yeah.
And that wasn't ever something that maybe I was given an answer to like that, like that. Oh, I could think. What do I think?
Yeah.
And so that's something I could take away from my experience. But when it comes to my sexual experience as a kid, and what I was taught, I didn't experience trauma from it personally, right? Even though I was raised in a way that taught me like it is better to wait until marriage to have sex for all these different reasons. It's the only surefire way to avoid an unplanned and unwanted pregnancy if you're not ready. And for me, that was a big driver too. Like this is the best, surest way that I am not going to get pregnant when I'm not ready to be and I don't want to be because I knew that I would never get an abortion. So if I had gotten pregnant before I was ready, that would be really hard. And so
that can happen in marriage, right? Like you can have unwanted pregnancy.
It can totally, but in a stable, loving relationship, like my last two pregnancies were surprises and we can completely handle it because we're stable, we're married, we're committed. And now I'm so glad I had those two surprise pregnancies. They're the biggest blessings and gifts of my life. I'm so glad I had 5. We didn't plan it. It was a surprise, but I would never change it for the world now.
Can I ask you 2 questions based on that? 1, what is your definition of marriage? And 2, do you think you would feel the same about waiting until you were married if, say, you hadn't met someone that you were interested in marrying until like your late 30s, like life had just gotten you?
That's a really good question. Definition of marriage would be a lifelong committed relationship that is publicly made known, that is faithful. That's what I would.
So you don't have to like sign a legal contract.
Yeah, I mean, I think signing a legal contract is easier to make it public and more official. I think there is beauty in it, and I think there's a reason why it exists. And I think like just stating publicly like, oh, we're committed partners doesn't hold the same weight to like a public ceremony and a signing that is like, we're committed for life. Because if you're in and the data does show if you live with someone before you get married, you are less likely to stay married, like to have a lifelong partnership. You're more likely to get divorced.
I really want to see that because like I hear that thrown around a lot and I would like to see that data.
Well, the reason why I think it's true is not necessarily because we lived together before, then that means we're less likely to stay together. I think it's more often the people who are choosing not to live together are, before they get married are more serious about a lifelong commitment, that they're going to take it more seriously. That's my thought. So it's not because living together before is going to damage your chances. I'm just my guess.
Yeah.
It's not like that's necessarily going to damage your chances of a lifelong commitment. It's just that the people who are choosing not to get married or not to live together before they get married are taking it extremely seriously. That like this is my ride or die. Whereas if you're living together with someone, oh yeah, we're committed, we're living together, we may get married, we not. Maybe have a little bit more relaxed opinion on like getting married and divorced. I don't know. What do you think?
I just wanted to see that study, like, because I hear that thrown around a lot in support of like traditional marriage. And like my partner and I moved in together, what, like 2 months after we met. And I just think, especially if you live in a big city, like it's not feasible for everyone. Like my roommate and I, we lived together for 7 years, and she was moving out and wanted to get her own place. I was going to be putting out a lot of money, but I was like, okay, I'm gonna get my own place,
And
you
couldn't
know.
find another roommate.
Not that I wanted. I mean, I probably could have found another roommate,
what
but
I
I was
would've done.
32.
Yeah,
I didn't really
I still
want
would have done
to.
it if it.
Yeah, like I can see why I just didn't. I was going to move out on my own. I was like, I don't want to live with another. I don't want to live with a roommate at 32.
Yeah,
I guess I'm just gonna like shell out the $2,000 to live in a shoebox.
Yeah.
It just is what it is, and I'll be
Totally.
poorer. It's fine, whatever. But then Ken invited me to stay with him, and you know, I guess I could have like figured it out from there. But anyway, yeah, I would just love to see that study and like what that's really grounded in, because like I said, I hear that thrown around a lot, and I also hear like one of the things people used to say growing up is that like every time you sleep with someone, you release as much oxytocin as like when a woman has a baby. And I'm like, I just really can't see how that is true. Like, I just don't feel connected to every eating. Yeah. No. So that's why I'm like, I want to see that. Yeah.
Because sex can either be good or great or not great.
You either
like,
feel connected.
Times where you're like, I'm not feeling it because I'm thinking about all these other things in my head. Like if men only knew what goes on in a woman's brain, like because they're just so thinking about anything and everything at the same time, whereas men are so single focused generally. Yeah.
But I also think about marriage, like I'm pretty like non-traditional in this way too. And I think a lot of people would assume differently based on my background. But like, I think that marriage is it's a system that was put in place to benefit the government basically, and it's like tax breaks and things like that, so they like incentivize it, but to keep systems in place that make it harder for single people. And so and then I also think it's just part of capitalism. Like, why the frick does it cost money to get a divorce? That's absurd, but it's part of capitalism, right? And I think the public announcement, I hate the wedding industry. Let it just be known. I think it's garbage. It's so silly. Like, and I see the amount of money that my friends spend on weddings. I'm sorry, friends, love you. But like, and I am blown away. I'm like, and 50%, over 50% end in divorce. So this public proclamation doesn't mean garbage. Even the all the money people pour into it, they still get freaking divorced.
I've been using Symbiotica supplements and incorporating them into my daily routine for the last 6 months, and it feels so good to nourish my body with high quality supplement formulas that work. I started taking Symbiotica because honestly, everyone is coming to the table with something they need to supplement, coming from different health backgrounds and our soil depleted ecosystem. Symbiotica fills those gaps. Since taking their products, I've noticed improved energy and focus, and my skin is glowing. And Symbiotica supplements are formulated with the highest quality ingredients out there. Their formulas don't have any seed oils, preservatives, toxins, artificial additives, or even natural flavors. The liposomal glutathione in particular promotes gut health, enhanced energy metabolism, and contains powerful antioxidant properties that combat premature aging. Most supplements often taste sulfuric or chalky, but not these supplements. These formulas taste delicious. Simply squeeze contents of the pouch into your mouth or stir into your favorite beverage. I'm also absolutely in love with taking their mineral Shilajit in the morning, which contains 84 plus minerals that promote healthy DNA and bodily functions and improves brain function. Feel more energized, alert, and balanced with high quality supplements that work. Head over to symbiotica.com and use the code ELLEN for 20% off plus free shipping on your subscription order.
Well, I would try. My goal is to try to change that. Like, I think these conversations are so helpful. Like, how can we have lifelong committed partnerships that are successful? You know, and I'll put all the studies that I mentioned in the show notes. My diet, or else I would bring them up. I'll put them in the show notes for if you want to check them out. I'll look up the one too. I didn't write down the one specifically on living together, but I will look it up and put it in the show notes.
Yeah. So I don't know about like getting married. I'm kind of like, I think if I wanted to if Ken and I decided to end our relationship, I would want that to be like a private decision between the two of us, and we wouldn't have to like involve a lawyer.
Yeah.
I think when it gets a little bit dicier, when you do need to involve the law, right, is when there are kids involved, or if you've gone in on property together, right? But I don't think that marriage necessarily carries more gravity just because it's marriage. I think it's individual to what each person thinks marriage means. Because if marriage is just kind of like what you do, next step, relationship escalator, then that's not really that important, right?
Right. Well, I see it a little differently because I think that there's value in public marriage because marriage does get really hard. Relationships get hard, and it would be easier to bail and give up if you didn't have like a public commitment that had like a certificate. That takes a little bit of effort. I don't think it should be expensive to get a divorce, though. That is odd. I didn't know that. But I do think that there is benefit to, I think the public sense is the family and friends holding you accountable. Like there is something to that. I think there's a beauty in that where we help each other through our hard times. You know, like you might find connection with your friend, talking to them what you're going through with your husband, and his friend helping him through, this is how you can show up in a better place. You got this, or no, this is not okay. Like, so we're going to talk to get together and speak to each other how to make things right, and ideally community and uplifting each other through the hard times is kind of like where I see the benefit, because it's beneficial for children, you know, as another reason. Like it is beneficial for children, for parents to stay together. Yes, there are outliers where kids will say, oh, it was better when my parents got divorced because it was so toxic while they were together. That's a real thing. But I do think they're are more likely to have issues through parents getting divorced, and more often than not, it is better if parents can work it out and stay together.
Yeah, I think again, I hear you. It's all ideal though, right?
Well, like that's the point, right? We're speaking of the ideal. What's the ideal? Because we're all trying to grow and evolve towards the ideal. That's my goal. I'm not trying to be average. I'm not here to just be average Joe Ellen. I want to be my very best Ellen. You know?
I hear you, because I feel the same. Like, you know, without speaking too much about like and bringing Ken into this in a way that maybe he hasn't given me permission to. But like I had a model in my parents, right? And so I really strive for that excellence in our relationship. And like I see where we need to improve, and where more conversations need to happen, and where there needs to be better communication, where there needs to be more romance, where there, you know, like I see these things. And so, you know, we work together and yes, strive towards the ideal. But I also think that like relationships can end, and that doesn't mean they're a failure, and it's actually better if they're over and you can end them in a really, I've seen many of my friends divorce in a very cordial way, where the kids still know that they're very well taken care of, and the kids love, like they feel loved and they feel, you know, and then when
I agree with you there.
Yeah,
there are times for sure,
but I think we just, as a culture, because we've like vilified it so much, we haven't given people the freedom, or like not the freedom, but the tools to divorce amicably, you know? And like, it'd be like, actually, my kids aren't scarred for life. They know that they're loved. And actually, this is cool because they have 2 places they can go to, you know, like whatever that looks like. But we just, and I'm not saying it's not messy.
It complicates things.
It's super complicated. It is always best if you have 2 parents that are there for you, that love you, like
and
that's
they love each other,
and they love each
right?
other.
Like when you see your parents in love with each other, that is so good for kids.
But so few people even know how to do long-term relationship at all, let alone well. And again, they don't have the tools. But I also just do think it's like, it's okay. I feel like for me personally, it takes the pressure off hugely if I say like, my goal isn't to be in like this lifelong partnership with Ken forever.
That takes pressure off for you.
Yeah, because for me, it's like, I just want to show up day to day and continue choosing him. Of course, I want a life with him. I love him. Of course, I want him part of my life forever. It takes the pressure off of me to think like, if our relationship ends, it's not a failure, but I will absolutely, like, part of the mutuality of relationship is you both are committed to trying, to showing up for, right? The way my therapist framed it for me is to find the person who could live their life without you, but they don't want to. Right. I really valued like my person being an individual and having their own life and whatever. Like I know Ken could live without me. He just doesn't want to. Right. Like, and same, I could live without Ken. I don't want to.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so you keep you're incentivized because you want to keep working at it, even when it is hard, even when, and again, we've only been together 2 years, right? Like I know, but I just think like, again, labeling something as like a failure or like less than just because it ends.
No, totally. I would never want to label it like that. And if I have I labeled it like that? I'm not trying to label it as a failure or it ends. More so that it doesn't put pressure on me to like, I'm excited to live the rest of my life with him. And there are times when it's hard. Like we've been together over 23 years, 22 years now. And yeah, there's definitely been phases or months at a time where we're just like struggling and we got to work at it. But then when you make it right and really figure it out, like it is like 10 times better than it was before. And you're closer than you were ever before. So if you don't have that commitment of we are going to be ride or die for life, it would be easier to bail. You know, not easier, you know, when you have kids and stuff, because that obviously complicates it. But like, if you didn't have that and it was just you two together and we never made a public like marriage and we're just living together, it would be easier because there are going to be times when you're really frustrated and you think, oh, it might just be easier to start over, go with somebody else. But that's not my goal. My goal is like, I look at those couples, you know, those viral reels where like the old couples in love and they're like, have you ever seen where they're like tossing leaves on each other? And I'm like, that's what I want. Like, you know me so deeply more than anybody else in my life. And after the kids are grown, like we still have each other. That's my goal.
Yeah. I just think like I've you know, professional nanny. I've worked with all different kinds of families and whatnot and family structures. And I've been with families that aren't married and they have their reasons and they are just as committed they're more committed and happier than families that are. Like, I just don't think that marriage.
Right. Yeah. Like you're saying people who get divorced, but they're really committed to raising kids well. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying like they haven't even gotten married. They just live together. They have property together. They have kids together. They just never got married.
Yeah. There's definitely,
you know, like that. They just don't, because one of them has been previously divorced. And like there are lots of reasons people do it in an atypical way. So yeah, I just think, I don't know, that I just don't think like marriage is what makes a relationship the ultimate.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's
content.
I don't think it's the only thing. I think it's a piece.
Yeah.
Is my feeling that it's a piece of the puzzle, and not being committed and sleeping with whoever and just going through life sleeping with others, more likely to have unplanned pregnancies and STIs, going back to that thing, and it complicates life. Complicates things, and I don't think it's as good for society.
But life is complicated,
or for us too.
And like it's just one aspect of it. Like there are so many aspects of life that are complicated. It would have been easier for me to stay in Missouri and, you know, become a teacher like everyone else in my family. But instead I decided to complicate my life.
Right.
By, you know.
Well, I'm saying it would complicate it in a negative way, is my feeling. That it's better for families and for ourselves, at least for me, for what I want.
I would say for me personally, it would have been far more complicated for me to try to like fit myself into this narrow definition of what it means to be of value. And for me to have found my own way was far more enriching.
Yeah.
And I am so happy that I did it the way that I did.
Well, I'm glad you've had such a path where you're, you know, happy with your journey. That's what we hope for everyone, right? That we're thankful for the journey, and the hard times always make us better, you know? And I would never want to imply that you don't have value if you don't do it this way that I'm doing it. I don't think that at all. I think we all have inherent value. So I think we're coming close to the end. I have a question for you. Do you think I think to round it out, do you think there are any benefits to waiting until marriage to have sex? And are there any downsides to not?
Ooh, great question. Are there any benefits to waiting? I mean, all the ones that you mentioned that it seems like were really beneficial for you. I think it just comes down to the individual. Like if they really feel like this is an empowered choice and it's not something that they're doing because they think they lose value. And again, none of this is blatant in Sometimes it's overt, but a lot of times it's like subtle, and it's influence of peer and culture and all the messaging girls get. So it's not, sometimes we think it's our own choice, but really it's just like hugely influenced by everything around us. And then, like I said, for me, the gift of anonymity in the city gave me the opportunity to really figure out what is mine and what was kind of like thrust upon me. But if it truly, if waiting is the way that you feel you can best harvest, if that's the right word, deep intimacy, both emotional and physical, and you are very satisfied sexually. Look, a woman knows when she's satisfied sexually, right? Like you really feel that. Then yeah, obviously the things you mentioned that you feel like you really share with your husband are great. And what was the other one? Do you think there's any
negatives to not waiting?
Not waiting.
Sleeping with multiple people.
I think, are there negatives to sleeping with multiple people? I think if you're not, I don't know that it ever comes down to the amount of people so much as the education around sex. And if you're not, it's kind of like, I equate it to like teaching kids to drive. Like you wouldn't put a kid behind the wheel not having taught them how to drive and freaking tell them to wear their seatbelt, right? I feel the same about sex. Like if you're going to have sex, you should have all of the information that educates you and protects you, and then you can go learn how to navigate that, right? But if you don't even have those tools, I think that's where the harm comes in more than like the amount of people.
So does the amount of people have anything to do with it for you? Like if someone sleeps with 150 people, there are no downsides to that.
I mean, you're definitely increasing your risk, right, of unwanted pregnancy or STIs just by sheer volume of people. But like, if it was all consensual and it was all respectful and it felt very pleasurable for both parties and no one was hurt. I mean, because yes, when you have more sex, you do have more sex to compare things to, for sure. But I don't actually think that's a bad thing, because for me personally, that I can show up to my relationship and be like, this is not working out for me. Can we try some different things? That has helped me. If I never had good sex, I wouldn't know how to advocate for myself and know what is good and what isn't. Because honestly, when it comes to, so queer couples statistically have far better sex than straight couples. And it's because straight couples see their sex in media far more. So we have this idea of what it's supposed to look like. And what do you see in movies? The girl's always coming from penetration and blah, blah, blah. It's so unrealistic, right? And you're right, porn doesn't help it. And then we don't have sex education. And so people are learning from porn, blah, 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 right? Queer couples don't have the same issue. They're not seeing themselves like in media as much when it comes to sex. So they're literally just like responding to what feels good and what feels right. Women specifically, when they're showing up to sex, they feel pressure to like, especially if you're coming from purity culture, like your pleasure is not prioritized. It's not as important. So you could go into that. I know I've felt this for a long time, feeling like your job is to just make them feel good. And then you're not even prioritizing your own pleasure. And I think if I hadn't had enough experiences with men who really did prioritize my pleasure, I would probably always think that that previous way that I was having sex is it. Yeah. So I actually think for me, experience has made a massive difference in a positive way for me.
Yeah.
But it can be negative. Of course, it can be negative. Yeah. But for me,
it wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do think that that is a thing where women go into having sex thinking that it's, oh, this is for men's pleasure and I'm just here to be the for the men, the vessel, right? Yeah, but I do think, again, I don't think you have to sleep with a bunch of people to figure out that you deserve pleasure too. And that's communication you can have with your lifelong partner to figure that out. And that they can even figure it out potentially before you do. Yeah. That they might be like, look, this is something we should do for you. Yeah. Like you're like, I never thought of that. Like, that is something that can happen with one person committed for life, and you don't have to sleep with a bunch of people to figure that out.
I think just because Yes, that is correct. You can figure that out with one person. I think because female sexuality in circles where saving yourself until marriage is the right way, is like touted as the right way. Female sexuality is so demonized. Like being vocal about anything as a woman in most of those circles is demonized, that like I can't imagine like a woman feeling, even though it's taught to us that like, oh, it's okay within a marriage, it's okay within a marriage, it's okay within a marriage. I've met a lot of women who even once they got married just felt so much shame around sex that they couldn't even do it.
And men.
I
actually think probably more men would have more performance type of issues.
Yeah.
And know that is a thing, that for people who grow up feeling so much shame in Christian circles about sex and thinking, oh, just wait till you're married, then everything will be fine. But this whole time leading up to it, you're feeling so much shame. Yeah, that can really affect your sex life. So I think we can both agree and end on agreeing that the way that faith circles teach about sex
and gender roles and sex can be really harmful.
Well, I think that there's definitely, I would say there's a way to do it that's healthy in encouraging children to not sleep around and to save, I don't like the word save, but like to have sex with one person committed for life. I think that there's a way to teach that, and that's a healthy way versus there's a toxic way. And you might say that it's always going to be toxic to teach that, but at least we can agree there is a toxic way to do it.
Yeah, there's definitely a toxic way to do it. I think if you can, if there's a way to teach abstinence as like an option, but still give all the other information, but then say this is a totally valid way to do it if that's your choice.
And here are the benefits. The only sure way to prevent an unplanned pregnancy, the only sure way to prevent an STI, the only sure way to prevent, that kind of emotional connection with someone that you don't know well enough, that you could potentially feel used. Like I think there's a lot of benefits to teaching, especially young kids. If we're talking about growing up in church, like they're young, it sounds like you also agree that children shouldn't be having sex when they're
children.
Like let's say young people, young in teenagers, early teens, that there's benefit to waiting. That all that can be taught, the benefits of waiting, rather than just assuming teens are going to have sex. So we should just like give them the condoms, give them this is how you do it. Like, I think there's benefit to teaching that there is beauty and value in waiting, that you don't have to go have sex with someone just because they want to have sex with you, because that's common. That's a thing that teenagers go through, especially
That's not true consent, right? That's not true mutuality.
Right.
But it just is obviously the tactic, and I know we have to end, but like the approach has to change, because right now kids who get abstinence only education and who even vow abstinence are having sex at the exact same rates as kids who get holistic and comprehensive sex ed. Well, there are not that many kids getting comprehensive sex ed, by the way. I
would definitely agree. Growing up in a Christian school, and I was one of the few people choosing not to have sex. Although my friend group, none of us were having sex in high school. We were all raised in like Christian homes, and in fact, they were the ones that were like, you're letting him touch your butt? Like that's like, I'm like, it's hard, guys. Like, this is really hard. Like, so I had friends that
I'm
were like,
attracted to him.
Yeah. So
how dare I?
Exactly. So it was, I had friends where we were all like, had that choice and value to not want to sleep with guys in high school, So, but I think most of the people around were still having sex. Like, that was very normal, no matter whether they were all being taught not to have sex at all. So I do think, there's something to be said for that, for sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
I have so many other things, but I know we have to end at some point.
So. How long did we go? 2 hours.
2 hours, yeah.
That was fantastic. Thank you for coming on my podcast. I really appreciate the conversation, and I love hearing about your story. I think it's so cool how you went from like such a transformative experience. It sounds really cool to, as a young person, go through this, like, now I'm completely anonymous and I can just really completely think for myself. If you grew up feeling like you couldn't think for yourself, then that is such a beautiful thing, and I'm so happy for you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and everyone check out her book.
Yes, thank you. Please.